Wind combs Widow's Canyon as stakes bite stone. The marshal lies abed. Evan Cole pins a tin star, steady hands, no hunger for glory. 4 days to noon court, a straight spur targets graves and the seep. Here the canyon answers thoughts, not speech. Lies return louder, under cool daylight by the cairns. The echo rolls back a line no mouth spoke. Move the line, or answer. In the church desk, a sealed envelope waits. Will Evan dare break it? Wind combed Widow's Canyon the morning the stakes went in. Men in canvas coats swung hammers, the clang of iron ringing off red stone. Dust rose in sheets and drifted toward town. Evan Cole watched from the rim on his way to the forge, hat pulled low, hands marked by a blacksmith's life. He liked things that could be shaped with patience and heat. Land was different. Land remembered. Old Marshal Petty was down with a fever. The doctor said rest, no visitors. Deputy Badge sat on a peg in the jailhouse like a question no one wanted. Evan had kept his head out of town quarrels, so far. Fixing plowshares was cleaner than fixing men. A wagon creaked up from the rail spur. Avery Locke stepped down wearing a dark frock coat, boots that never seemed dusty, a watch chain neat across his vest. He smiled at Evan as if the man with the hammer and the man with the pen were the same kind of worker. "Good day to you," Locke said, voice smooth as oiled leather. "Progress sounds loud at first, but it settles into profit." Evan tipped his hat. "Morning. You're the blacksmith, most days." Locke studied the hammered stakes marking a straight line toward the canyon's narrow mouth. By week's end, a locomotive could whistle here. A short curve, then through. Town will thank me. "Those cairns sit in that path," Evan said, nodding toward the low stone mounds no one ever kicked over. A woman's shawl ribbon fluttered from one. It had once been blue. Locke's smile thinned. "Relocations are common practice. We'll do all proper." "Proper means leaving them where their people left them," Evan answered, not loud, not rude, just steady. From the far side, Silas Dodd, Locke's foreman, scratched his beard and coughed. "Boss, you want the test charge set?" "Hand-sized pop. See the shale." Locke waved his glove. "Proceed." Evan started to say something about permits and a circuit judge due next Sunday, but Dodd was already motioning the crew below. A small sack of powder, a careful fuse. The men stepped back, counted, and the hand pop thumped the canyon floor. Dust lifted like breath from a sleeping chest. Then the echo came. Not a simple clap returning clap, not boyish whoops bouncing off walls. It rolled out from the grave mounds under the cool daylight, traveled along the rim like it was reading a ledger, and came back in a voice that belonged to no throat Evan could see. "Move the line," or "answer." Hammers stopped midair. One man crossed himself. Another said, "Hear that?" to no one in particular. Locke chuckled, but it took effort. "Win nonsense," he said. "We'll have enough of it today." He glanced at the cairns, then at Evan, as if daring him to call it anything but air. At the church above town, the bell gave a single soft note. Habit, a rope shifting in a draft, or a reminder. Ruth Avery, schoolteacher, records keeper, appeared at the canyon edge with a basket on her arm. Her eyes were the kind that measured twice and cut once. "Don't mind me," she said to Evan. "Brought biscuits for the marshal." Then to Locke, polite as a schoolbook. "Sir?" Locke tipped his hat. "Miss Avery, you and I will be neighbors soon." Ruth looked past him to the mounds. "Neighbors are chosen," she said. "By contracts," Locke replied. "By promises," she answered, quiet. Evan walked Ruth back toward town. On the mesa path, her voice dropped. "There's a sealed envelope in the church desk, addressed to the next officer of peace when needed most. I thought it was a silly thing left by the traveling minister years ago. Today it doesn't feel silly." Evan exhaled. "Marshall's sick." "I know." She stopped, studying his face. "Your hands are steady. They're for iron. Law needs steady more than loud," she said, then held his gaze. "If the envelope is for now, someone has to open it." Evan looked toward the jailhouse and the tin star waiting on its peg. He had carried anvils across the yard without complaint. This felt heavier. By noon, condemnation notices were nailed to the mercantile door. Locke's man read them out, voice slick with certainty. "Hearing to be held Sunday at 12 o'clock at the mouth of Widow's Canyon. Right of way under expedited necessity." Ruth's jaw tightened. She folded her hands as if to keep them from shaking. Expedited, she repeated, as if tasting iron. Evan stepped inside the dim jail and stood before the peg. The badge caught the light. He could smell oil from the gun rack, old pine from the floorboards, rain that hadn't come yet. Marshall needs rest, Doc said from the doorway. Town needs a deputy till Sunday. Evan pinned the star to his vest. It felt cold through the cloth. Outside, the wind shifted, and for a heartbeat the town sounded like the canyon. Breath held, listening. Far off, a train gave a thin whistle, and the stone gave nothing back, not yet. By mid-morning the next day, square sheets of paper clapped against clapboard as Locke's men nailed up condemnation notices from the mercantile to the feed store. The foreman, Silas Dodd, read the words slow, as if reading made them true. Expedited necessity, he said, clearing his throat. Townsfolk paused in the dust, hats tilted, eyes moving from paper to Evan's new badge. Evan stood beside the doorframe, the tin star cold against his vest. He had slept little. The sound of that echo still carried in his head, a low drumbeat behind everything. He told himself he wore the star to keep temper steady. To keep peace, you had to step where the first angry foot might fall. A handbill announced a courtesy supper at Locke's boarding tent by the spur, promises of wages, fresh lumber, a company store to follow. The bell at the church tolled noon, as if agreeing to an appointment no one could avoid. Ruth Avery found Evan crossing the street with a ledger tucked under her arm. "You'll want this," she said, tapping the worn leather. Interments, families, dates. Her voice was even, but her fingers pressed the cover like it might fly away. Evan nodded. "I'll read it." "You'll need more than reading," she lowered her voice. "Those graves mark people who built the town before plats and maps. If a judge asks who they were, we should say their names, not just numbers." "I'm aiming to keep it from a fight," Evan said. "That would be mercy." Ruth's eyes held his. "Mercy keeps its own records, too." At sundown, the boarding tent glowed with lantern light. Tables were set with tin plates and a roast that smelled like generosity. Avery Locke stood near the head, coat off, shirt sleeves perfect. He lifted a cup and smiled the way a man does when he believes his plan is the only road worth taking. "Neighbors," Locke said, voice carrying easy, "we all want the same thing. Work, safety, a future that runs on time." He tapped his pocket watch as if the sound of it could settle every heart. "There'll be jobs, steady ones. Fewer muddy boots wandering for cattle that aren't there. A spur turns this town from a siding into a destination." Murmurs of approval mixed with the scrape of forks. Dodd moved through the crowd, shaking hands, repeating, "Friday we set the main charges, then rails by Sunday if the Lord's willing and the rock behaves." Evan stayed near the tent flap with a cup of coffee gone cold, listening. A company lawyer, narrow in the face, unfolded route sheets and read numbers and bearings like scripture. Section 12, line B, degrees east by northeast. From beyond the lantern glow, the canyon returned fragments, thin as frost cracking. Graves, ode, bend. A spoon clattered. Somebody laughed, then swallowed it back. The lawyer blinked, pretended not to. Hear, and cleared his throat. Continuing. Stakes numbered. The echo sent back a single word. Ode. Locke's smile tightened, but he didn't flinch. "Wind finds its voice when men get nervous," he said lightly, to the room, and to Evan both. "We won't legislate the weather." Ruth leaned toward Evan. "It isn't weather." Evan's jaw worked. "I'll walk the line with Dodd tomorrow. If there's a safer curve, we'll find it." Locke overheard, stepped nearer. "Deputy, the curve we have is the curve the rock allows," he said, generous on the surface, iron underneath. "Delays kill jobs. Men feed families with timetables, not wishes. Families bury their dead by promises, not timetables," Evan replied, quiet. Locke's eyes measured him. "Friday at dawn, Mr. Cole. Let the canyon watch us work. You'll see there's no harm in honest progress." Dodd grunted. "We'll start with the upper wall." Doctor's sighs, gentle. Evan nodded because he needed the walk. He needed to put his hands on the earth that would answer him back. The badge felt heavier as he left the tent, the ledger under his arm like a second spine. At first light the next day, he and Dodd walked the stakes. Cool daylight lay across the cairns, and every small sound seemed enlarged. The click of a pebble, the breath of a horse. Evan crouched, laying his palm against the shale. He could feel fractures like old scars. "There's a shelf there," he said, pointing. A gentle bend might ride it without touching the cairns. Dodd squinted. Maybe, or maybe not. Boss likes straight lines. Straight isn't always honest, Evan said. Honest don't pay a crew, Dodd muttered, but without heat. He spat, then crossed himself without looking at the graves. The company lawyer arrived late with his papers. He cleared his throat and began again, voice trying for normal. By measure and compass. The canyon cut him off with a low return that seemed to rise from under their boots. Graves, bend, keep. Evan swallowed, and a thought rose before he could pin it. Down. You will fail them. The echo carried it back, louder, like a bell struck in his own chest. You will fail them. Dodd stepped away, pale. Hearing things I don't care to hear, deputy. Evan stood, dust on his knees, and steadied his breath. Then let's listen right. From the rim, Ruth watched with a hand to her hat, the ledger opened to a page of names. Far below, a fuse rope coiled quiet as a snake beside a crate marked for Friday. The wind fell still, as if the canyon were waiting to see who would speak plain first. By mid-morning, a rider from Pine Crossing rattled in with Judge Hollis on the buckboard, dust gray on his hat brim, and a weariness that looked honest. He climbed down slow, shook Evan's hand, and took Ruth's with a nod that said he knew a teacher's steadiness when he saw it. You sent word a town quarrel found teeth, he said. Teeth and echoes, Evan answered. They gathered in the small church where sunlight fell through wavy glass. Ruth unlocked the desk drawer and lifted out the sealed envelope she had mentioned. The wax was cracked with age, but the flap still held. Addressed in a traveling minister's hand, to the next officer of peace when needed most. Judge Hollis set his spectacles, laid the envelope on the table, and glanced at Evan's badge. You wearing that for show or service, Mr. Cole? For keeping people from making one another sorry, Evan said. That counts? The judge slid a penknife under the flap, opened it, and drew out folded parchment and a smaller note. Ruth stood close. Evan could hear her breath. The parchment bore the date 1867 and the bold hand of the First Circuit minister who had preached out of a saddlebag here. It placed the canyon benches, the cairns, and the seep under a church trust for the keeping of the dead and the common mercy of water. A clause, plain as fence wire, read, No iron shall cross the cairns, bend where the rock invites. Ruth pressed a palm to her ledger as if steadying time. I knew there had been a grant. I didn't know it named the seep. Judge Hollis read twice, mouth a line. This isn't small. Trusts speak even when the men who signed them are long gone. He tapped the smaller note. And this says the echo here will make intention plain when words go crooked. His eyes lifted. You all telling me the rock's a witness? Evan didn't smile. You'll hear it yourself. They walked to the canyon under a sky the color of tin. Crewman pretended not to watch. Locke and his lawyer arrived together, neat as coins just minted. Silas Dodd trailed, jaw working a plug of something he didn't enjoy. Judge Hollis climbed onto a flat rock near the cairns. We'll test this without foolishness. He looked at Evan. Tell me what you intend. Evan set his boots square. Protect the graves. Keep the seep flowing. Let the spur run if it can curve. I intend all three. He spoke simple. The canyon gave his words back, soft and even, like water lapping stone. Protect the graves. Keep the seep. Let the spur run. A murmur ran through the crew. Ruth's knuckles whitened on the ledger, but her face stayed calm. The judge turned to Locke. Mr. Locke, what is your intent? Locke's smile was polished. To bring a lawful line and wages to a place that needs both. No graves here will suffer. We will honor every standard. His lawyer stood like a punctuation mark beside him. For a second it seemed the canyon would take the recital and let it pass. Then, from beneath the cool daylight by the cairns, the return rolled out. Not his careful words, but the clean edge beneath them. Move what's in the way. A couple of men removed their hats without thinking. Dodd stopped chewing. Locke lifted his chin. Wind tricks. Judge Hollis didn't blink. Wind doesn't file grants. He held up the parchment. This trust predates your right-of-way, and it names the seep, which means cutting it may cut a town's throat. He gestured to Ruth. Miss Avery? Ruth opened her ledger. She read names, not numbers. Mrs. Eliza Pike, 1871, Tobias. Crane, 1872. 2 infants, winter of 74. A rider found in spring snow, never named, laid here with a prayer. As each name left her mouth, The canyon answered with a hush that wasn't silence so much as regard. The judge nodded once. Records kept, promises kept. He climbed down, went to the edge where Evan had traced his hand the day before, and squatted. You spoke of a shelf. Evan pointed to the pale line in the shale and the fracture that ran like a ripple. A curve could ride that and clear the cairns by a wagon length. Locke's lawyer leaned in with measuring eyes. That shelf sloughs in heat, he said. Maintenance risk. Cost. Cost sits on both sides, Judge Hollis said. Law doesn't make widows twice. Locke's mouth thinned. Justice also feeds the living. It does, the judge said, and it starts by not robbing the dead. He straightened, winced at his back, and looked toward the church bell visible on the rise. Court will convene here Sunday at noon. Bring your plats, your trusts, your names. Until then, no blasting. Dodd let out a breath he might have been holding since dawn. No blasting, he repeated to his men, as if saying it made it safer to believe. Locke put his watch away with the care of someone putting away a temper. You'll have your theater, Judge, he said. Truth won't tremble. The judge met his eyes, tired but unshaken. Sometimes it's men who tremble when truth won't. They broke apart under a light that had shifted cooler, like the sun had stepped behind a thought. Evan felt the star on his vest grow less like iron, and more like a promise he didn't know how to keep yet. Ruth closed the ledger gently, as you do a book you intend to open again soon. As they started back, the canyon sent one more thin return across the benches, too quiet for some, clear to those who were listening. Bend where the rock invites. Evan glanced at the cairns and at the shelf line. He nodded once to no one at all. Somewhere a fuse rope lay coiled like a sleeping snake, waiting to learn which way the town would choose to wake. Sunday came bright and cool, the kind of Wyoming morning that smells like wet stone, even when it hasn't rained. The hymn at the church was short. Pastor Lane bowed to the judge's order, and the whole congregation walked the wagon road to the canyon. Women carried baskets, men shouldered benches, children learned quiet by watching their mothers' hands. Ruth Avery kept the grant tucked in her ledger. Evan walked at the outer edge, the tin star steady against his vest. Judge Hollis had a wagon bed dragged near the cairns. He stood on it, hat off, spectacles low. Court of the Territory is open, he said, voice not loud, just certain. We take testimony as near the matter as a man can stand to it. Keep your tempers. Speak plain. Avery Locke arrived with a small retinue, coat pressed, pocket watch gleaming like a bright coin. He nodded at parishioners as if this were another kind of service he knew how to run. His lawyer unrolled maps across a dry goods plank and weighed corners with stones. Silas Dodd hovered by the crates, hat in his hands. Pastor Lane offered a prayer that used the word neighbor twice and the word mercy 3 times, then stepped down. The judge gestured to Ruth. Records keeper up front. Ruth laid the ledger and the parchment where everyone could see. She did not look at Locke. She looked at the cairns, then at the judge. We have names, she said. Hollis nodded to Evan. Deputy, state your intent again. Let the stone hear you clean. Evan squared his shoulders. Protect the graves. Keep the seep. Let the spur run if it can bend. The canyon gave him back the same words, plain and calm, as if stone had a memory for courage when it was spoken without swagger. A child near the front took her mother's hand and smiled because the echo felt like being answered kindly. Locke lifted his chin. Your Honor, intention is a charming thing, but rails require geometry. The shelf your deputy favors sloughs in heat. If we delay, we lose crews. If we curve, we add cost. We are here to balance needs. The judge scratched a note on a folded paper. Needs are heavier when carried alone. We set them on the table together. He pointed to the lawyer. Show the line. The lawyer announced bearings and numbers. As he spoke, Section 12, Line B, the canyon sent back thin fragments that rode the edges of the words like moths skimming flame. Graves, ode, bend. Murmurs rose and settled like prairie wind. Hollis lifted a palm. We will hear townsfolk. Old Eli Goodnight pushed forward on a cane, hat under his arm. His beard was smoke white, hands a map of a life spent outdoors. He touched the nearest cairn as a man touches a door jamb he built himself. My Ruth lies here, he said, voice sanded by years. Married her when the valley had 6 families and 2 cows between them. She asked me to leave her where the wind knows her. I intend to keep that promise. He didn't cry. He simply said his will. down like a post in good ground. The echo brought one word back, clear as water in a pail: keep. A long silence followed. Dodd blinked hard and looked at his boots. Locke's jaw tightened, but his smile held. Then came the Widow Pike's boy, lanky, hat too big. "I ain't got much to say," he muttered. "Mama liked the sound up here, said it told her the Lord heard even small talk. If they move her, I won't know where to stand on Sundays." The canyon did not repeat him. It did something smaller. It held still, the kind of still that lets a man hear his own heartbeat. Hollis wrote another line. From the back, a shopkeeper spoke with a different tilt to his words. "We can't live on memories," he said. "Jobs feed children." Under his breath, aimed at no one, he added, "and clear my debts." The canyon, faithful to its rule, sent the hidden part back soft enough to sting only him. Debts. He went red. He didn't speak again. Ruth read names, the ledger turning like a wheel. 2 infants, winter of 74, she said. Unmarked, but remembered. Her voice didn't crack, but people moved closer without meaning to. Locke's turn came. He rested both hands on the plank of maps. "I intend wages, timetables, and a spur that makes this place more than a siding. I intend to disturb nothing that cannot be made right." There was a heartbeat where nothing returned. Then the stone chose the line underneath, iron and unvarnished. "Move what's in the way." Hollis's eyes narrowed behind the spectacles. Truth's louder when a man tries to speak around it. The judge folded the grant and raised it. "This trust stands until proven otherwise. The seep is part of it. The graves are the heart of it. I will consider a curve on the shelf, Deputy Cole described. Until my ruling, no charges set. Violation will be contempt of this court." Locke's smile cooled. "You ask me to lose a day, Judge." "I ask you not to lose your way," Hollis said. People exhaled. Baskets opened. Food appeared like hope does, out of hands, not... Speeches Evan took no plate. He walked the rim and drew the curve in chalk, where the rock invited. Ruth joined him, sleeves rolled, pencil behind her ear. "You were steady," she said. "I felt unsteady," he admitted. "Steady isn't a feeling," she answered. "It's a choice." Below, Dodd shooed his crew from the crates. He crossed himself when he thought no one watched. Locke checked his watch, lips thin, eyes on the chalk line. A cloud eased over the sun. The canyon held its breath. Far off, a single rail joint pinged in the heat with a note like a question that no one wanted to hear twice. Clouds lay thin as gauze when Judge Hollis reconvened the hearing in the afternoon. The wagon bed still served as a bench, but the congregation had thinned to a ring of faces you would recognize at any burial or birth. Evan stood near the cairns with chalk dust on his fingers from the shelf line he had traced. Ruth kept the grant and her ledger centered like 2 hands meeting. Avery Locke stepped forward with a calm built for boardrooms and storms. His lawyer held a stiff folio tied in red twine. "Your Honor," Locke said, "in the spirit of good order, we submit an amendment executed 12 years after the original trust by the pastor then in charge. It authorizes relocation of graves when development serves the common good, provided reverent handling." He untied the ribbon. The paper looked old enough to fool a man in a hurry. Ink brown, edges tired. The signature wobbled. Reverend Amos Tate. Ruth's face changed in a way only Evan noticed. Her fingers rested on the ledger as if finding a place she feared to read. Judge Hollis adjusted his spectacles. "Dated September of 79, he glanced to Pastor Lane. "Where was Reverend Tate that fall?" Pastor Lane rubbed his beard. "Circuit log says he wintered 2 counties east that year. He only passed through here the spring before and the summer after." Locke's lawyer offered a smooth shrug. "Circuit logs are tidy in theory. In practice, bring the paper to..." "The stone," Hollis said, surprising everyone. "If the canyon speaks intention, maybe we listen to whether this move was made honest." They gathered closer to the cairns under that cool daylight, the place preferred. The judge held the amendment and addressed the open rock. "This paper claims the right to move these graves for a spur. If the intention behind its signing was lawful care, repeat it plain." The wind went around them like a polite guest. The canyon gave nothing back. Evan felt the stillness crawl his spine. The rule had shown itself all week. Intent came back, crooked words returned straight. Now the stone was quiet as a held breath. Ruth, soft. "The echo doesn't invent names or speak for men not standing here. Judge Hollis lowered the paper, unreadable. It answers living intent, not dead ink. Locke took the silence like a gift. He lifted his pocket watch, thumbed it once. Silence is not a verdict, Your Honor. It's efficiency. We have crews waiting. The amendment acknowledges. Realities, families are compensated. A respectful relocation. Ruth opened her ledger to a glued-in receipt, ink faded but stubborn. Reverend Tate signed a note that same year, she said, voice steady because it had to be. The church took a loan from a frontier development fund to repair the roof and buy hymnals. She looked up. That fund is a railroad affiliate, Mr. Locke. A ripple rolled through the ring of faces. Locke did not blink. Towns and railroads develop one another, Miss Avery. That is not a sin. It is cooperation. Judge Hollis tapped the amendment. A coerced hand is not a free hand. If this pastor signed because the church owed a company wearing your Sunday name, we don't call that consent. The lawyer straightened his collar. You allege coercion. Prove it. Evan felt the badge again, cold on bone. Proving coercion takes time, he said. You want to light fuses Friday. Locke's smile thinned. I want to keep men in work and timetables from slipping. Your talk of shelves and curves costs money. If this trust blocks a lawful spur, my shareholders will seek damages. From the town, if it is the town's obstruction. The word damages made folks' eyes slide to one another. Storekeepers with thin margins, ranchers counting winter hay, mothers with lists in their heads. Ruth's jaw set. Judge Hollis drew a breath that sounded older than his years. Here's the law for today. No blasting until Sunday's ruling. Bring me proof the amendment stands by a free hand, or bring me a better curve. Do not test me by noise. Locke closed his watch with a click that felt like a door shutting. Then we will be ready for dawn Saturday, he said, careful as carpentry. If the law allows Sunday work, rails will meet your wagon bed after church. Silas Dodd flinched. Boss, Saturday. Saturday is preparation, Locke said without looking at him. Nothing unlawful about staging charges. Evans stepped off the rock and faced Dodd. Move your powder to the far rim today, away from the cairns. Dodd's eyes flicked to Locke, then to the graves. I can shift crates, he muttered. I can't shift orders. Ruth closed the ledger and slid the grant back into its envelope like returning a blade to its sheath. If the trust stands, he sues the town, she said to Evan as people drifted, talking low. If it falls, we lose the seep and the dead are unsettled. That's the trap. Traps have springs, Evan answered, scanning the shelf chalk line, calculating. We find the one that trips his without breaking ours. Behind them, the canyon stayed quiet, as if waiting to choose between two kinds of loss. Locke's tent snapped him in a sudden gust, and his watch chain flashed like a thin line of sun on steel. Evan looked at the star on his vest and felt it, for the first time, as weight he had picked up himself. He touched the chalk in his pocket, the way a man touches hope he isn't yet ready to name. Across the benches, a fuse rope lay coiled in shadow like a thought someone meant to keep, secret until morning. By dawn Saturday, the town had split into two lines you couldn't see, but everybody felt. Storekeepers counted future wages on one side. Widows and ranch hands stood by promises on the other. Evan woke before light, the badge colder than his shirt could warm. He'd lain half the night staring at the ceiling, hearing the word damages rattle like a loose hinge. Twice he thought about marching to the spur to impound the powder. Twice he saw the aftermath, men out of work, tempers lit, and let the thought go. Keeping peace meant not lighting fuses you couldn't put out. He found Ruth at the church steps with her ledger and the grant, hair pinned tight, sleeves rolled. You look like a long day, she said. Feels longer if I make the wrong kind of law, he answered. I could seize Locke's crates. It might save a shelf and lose the town. Ruth looked toward the canyon. Then let's make the canyon do the talking, not with superstition, with what it reveals. They walked the rim in that cool daylight the echoes favored. Evan carried chalk and a length of sash cord. Ruth carried a tin cup and a small bell, like the kind teachers use when voices run away. At the seep, he drove a thin stake a boot length from the wet edge. Ruth dipped the cup, poured onto dust a few feet downhill, and watched the trickle find a hairline fracture and vanish beneath. Underground vein, she said, which the straight spur would pinch, Evan murmured. He knelt, set the cord across the shale, and sighted the chalk line that rode the shelf. Curve gives it room to breathe. Silas Dodd came down the trail alone, hat in his hands, eyes red from a kind of tired that doesn't come from work. "Boss sent me to count crates and act busy," he said, dry. "Figure I'd rather count rocks, less likely to explode." Evan straightened. "You know rock better than any man Locke pays." "I know fear better than he does," Dodd said, glancing at the cairns. "Place here's what a man means." Evan showed him the stake, the cord, the trickle that vanished. "If a judge stands here at noon tomorrow and sees this, he can order a curve that keeps water. I want the court moved to the blast site, not talk about it from a wagon bed. Stand on it." Dodd scratched his beard. "You asking me to like a delay?" "I'm asking you to help prevent a riot," Evan said. "If I seize the powder, we break before we bend." Silas looked at the crates stacked like quiet arguments under tarps. He sighed. "I can stage the charges way off the shelf. Gives you room to show your trickle and your chalk without a fuse under your boots." "Do that," Evan said. "And tell your men no test pops. Judge gave his word about noise." Ruth rang her little bell once, soft. The sound carried to the cairns and came back with no extra weight. "No lies on my mind," she said, almost smiling. Then she opened the ledger to a blank margin and penciled, small, "No iron over the cairns. Bend where the rock invites." By mid-morning, Evan found Judge Hollis at the Wool. Cafe, nursing coffee like medicine. The judge listened without blinking as Evan laid out the seep, the shelf, the cord, and the wish to move court to the crates at noon Sunday. "You could have grabbed his powder," Hollis said. "I'd rather grab daylight and proof," Evan answered. "Let the town see what their law sees." The judge nodded once. "You picked the hard path. The right one's usually uphill." He folded his napkin with a care that looked like habit. "Court will meet the rock where it means to be cut." Word went out. You could feel the town breathe, not easier, just steadier. Locke heard too. He stood at the spur and rolled his watch chain in his fingers, the way a man rolls a thought he intends to keep. "Stage for noon," he told Dodd. "No fuses near the deputy's drawing. Show them we are reasonable." Ruth and Evan spent the afternoon marking the gentler curve with chalk and stakes cut from willow. They worked like people building a fence they hoped would still be standing come winter. Once Ruth stopped and placed the tin star between her palms, centering it over Evan's vest. "This doesn't make you tall," she said. "It makes you weight-bearing." "Feels that way," he said. As the light went thin, the canyon caught a thread of his unguarded thought. "Please don't let me fail them," and sent it back not louder this time, but clearer, like a plucked string tuned true. "Don't fail them." Evan exhaled, squinting toward the crates parked at a respectful distance. "Tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow," Ruth echoed, closing the ledger on the grant as if sealing a promise for the night. Far off, Locke snapped his watch shut. At the cairns, the air cooled, and the stone held a silence that felt less like absence and more like a held breath before a verdict. By Saturday evening, the town had divided itself without a fist raised. 2 petitions passed from hand to hand, like opposite hymns sung under the same roof. At the mercantile counter, the shopkeeper lined up inkwells and said jobs with a ye, brightness that sounded borrowed. On the church steps, Pastor Lane steadied a second sheet that read, in Ruth's careful hand, "Protect the graves and the seep, except a lawful curve." Hats dipped over both pages. Some folks signed twice, then scratched one out, ashamed of indecision. Evan walked between the 2 tables until the walking felt like work he could measure. He said little. The badge sat centered on his vest like a weight-bearing beam. Every so often Locke's lawyer appeared with his smooth paper smile, reminding people there would be damages if obstruction won. Every so often Ruth stepped near, reminding them that promises made over graves don't evaporate in sunlight. At dusk, the boarding tent filled with talk that never sharpened into a fight. Silas Dodd stood in the door like a hinge, keeping men from leaning toward trouble. "Court's at the crates tomorrow," he repeated. "No fuses near the shelf. Don't spook the judge or the stone." Locke kept to the lamplight, rolling his pocket watch chain with 2 fingers, patient as a surveyor clocking shadows. He spoke to a circle of ranch hands about timetables and feed stores and winter. He didn't lie. He left out what he meant to move. Near 9, Ruth found Evan by the church desk. She'd set the grant on cloth, a taper burning low, spectacles she didn't need perched on her nose for the comfort of the habit. "I've been fussing this edge," she said, tapping a soot-dark margin where the parchment had been handled by a dozen careful hands across 22 years. "Thought it was only grime." She lifted a thin sheet, rubbed a wedge of charcoal across it, then pressed it lightly over the margin and pulled it away. The ghost of a line rose out of the fibers, faint but legible where no ink remained. The very words she had written in her ledger yesterday, only older, as if time had returned them for proof. No iron over the cairns. Bend where the rock invites. Evan leaned in. That's the minister's hand? Ruth swallowed, throat tight with the soft shock of being right without wanting the pride. The strokes match his signing. He must have added it later, soft pencil, meaning it as instruction, not flourish. Her voice steadied. I'll bring both. My ledger note and this impression. The judge will prefer the dead man's handwriting. Evan let the relief through his shoulders. Paper says bend. Rock says bend. Men say cost, Ruth answered, closing the folder. Tomorrow we make cost look smaller than conscience. They blew out the taper and stepped into a night so clear the stars looked like nailheads tapped into a black board. Evan walked her toward the low bridge that crossed a dray wash above town. Down in the dark, frogs made a noise like someone shuffling cards. He could feel sleep trying for him and failing. You're ready, Ruth said. No, he said, honest, but I'm steady. Steady is enough, she said. He left her at her porch and headed for the rim out of a need he couldn't name. The canyon in moonlight was only shape and suggestion. The rule here held until sundown, then went quiet, but he came anyway. He set a palm on the cool shale above the chalked curve and watched his breath drift like the last of a winter horse. Silence lasted until the first light cracked the eastern lip. With the daylight came the canyon's listening. Evan said nothing. He only let the fear step forward in him where it could be seen. The stone offered it back in a single word, small and undeniable, as if returned from his own chest. Stand. He did not say thank you out loud. He only put his hand on the tin star and held it there until the metal warmed. By mid-morning Sunday, the petitions were full. Locke had a stack that said jobs now. Ruth had one that said bend. Judge Hollis arrived with grit at his cuffs and sleep in his eyes. He looked at the crates staged away from the shelf, at the chalk stakes marking the gentler line, and at the town gathered on both sides of a question. Bring your papers to the rock, he said. Evan lifted the grant and the rubbing. The wind dropped. The noon whistle from the spur was due in an hour. Somewhere, a single fuse rope lay coiled like a quiet dare. The canyon waited for someone to speak first. Noon found the town standing in a horseshoe around the staged crates. The sun burned white on tin cups and hat brims. Dust hung in the air like a decision that hadn't landed yet. Judge Hollis stepped onto a low outcrop near the seep, boots careful, papers tucked close. Evan stood a few paces away with the grant, Ruth beside him, holding the charcoal rubbing, as if it were a lantern for daylight. Silas Dodd had done as asked, powder stacked far from the chalked curve, fuses tied off and looped like coiled snakes unwilling to wake. Locke arrived last, coat immaculate, watch chain neat as a rule on a school slate. His lawyer placed the route sheets on a plank propped between two crates, and for a second, the canyon looked like a courtroom that had outgrown its walls. Judge Hollis raised a palm. We meet the cut where it means to happen. Speak plain, all of you. Remember the rule we have learned. This stone answers intention. He nodded to Evan first. Deputy? Evan centered his boots, lifted the parchment, and let his voice be what it could be. Steady, not large. I intend to keep the graves where their people set them. I intend to protect the seep that waters stock and children. If the spur can bend to do both, I intend trains to run. The canyon sent his words back unbroken, each phrase returning like it had found home. Keep the graves, protect the seep, let trains run. An undertone of relief moved through the crowd. Ruth's shoulders loosened a breath's width. Miss Avery, the judge said. Ruth stepped up with the rubbing, charcoal ghost of the margin note facing the light. We have the minister's clause, writ faint and old, but his strokes match. She tapped the words. No iron over the cairns. Bend where the rock invites. She lifted her eyes. I intend to keep records that help neighbors keep promises. The stone offered no echo, nothing false to correct, only a stillness that felt like a scent. Judge Hollis turned. Mr. Locke. Locke smiled like a man indulging a custom he considered quaint. I intend wages. Schedules kept, safety foremost. If something can be put right, we put it right. We will disturb nothing that cannot be made right. Silence held for a breath. Then the canyon reached under his polish and returned the line he had kept behind his teeth. Blast and bury. It came low and clean, iron on rock. The lawyer glanced at Locke, color draining. Dodd closed his eyes, jaw tight. Locke didn't twitch, but his smile shortened as if trimmed with a hard knife. Echoes play tricks, he said. Wind throws men's nerves back at them. The court cannot be guided by superstition. Hollis adjusted his spectacles. If a man lies to himself, that's his superstition. He extended a hand. Your amendment. Locke's lawyer passed it up with practiced care. The judge held it near the seep's reflected light. Ink and dates say one thing. Circuit logs say another. And we have this, he touched the rubbing, and this shelf. He looked at Evan. Show it. Evan took a length of cord, stretched it along the chalked stakes, and set a tin cup at the wet edge. Ruth poured. The trickle ran, hit a hairline, and vanished. He moved the cord outward along the gentler curve. Ruth poured again. The water lipped over rock and kept to daylight, bypassing the fracture. The straight line pinches the seam, Evan said. The curve gives it room. Dodd crouched, squinting as if the rock were a man telling the truth he didn't want to hear. He's right, he said, voice flat with reluctant respect. Shale'll slough under summer if we cut hard. The shelf'll hold with cribbing. Locke's jaw worked once. Cost, the judge agreed, but paid forward instead of back. He stepped higher on the outcrop, facing the town and the graves and the man with the watch. Here is my order. The trust stands. No iron over the cairns. The seep is protected. The spur may run on the shelf by a gentler curve. Charges staged today are not to be set in any place that endangers either. Violate this, and I hold you in contempt. You could hear the town absorb it, the rancher whose herd watered at the seep, the shopkeeper balancing ledgers in his head, widows counting Sundays by a stone. Relief didn't cheer, it rooted. Locke's lawyer leaned close, whispering about appeals. Locke watched the watch in his hand as if it could push back time. Then he snapped it shut, the click like a man putting away his temper. We'll build your curve, he said, but the way he said your made the word way more than steel. Hollis didn't look away. It's our curve, he said, and for once the pronoun felt like a fence built right. Dodd stood, lifted a hand to his crew. You heard the judge. No fuses near the shelf. Start shifting timbers. A half-dozen men moved with visible relief, not joy, just the ease of stepping off ice. Ruth exhaled and found Evan's sleeve with her fingertips before she caught herself. You were weight-bearing, she said, quiet. He nodded, throat thick. So were you. Across the benches, a breeze slid through the cairns like a hymn with no words, and the echo, just once, gave back a single syllable so soft only those listening hard would hear it. Keep. Locke turned away, voice low to his lawyer, already calculating. But for now, the fuses slept, the shelf held its line, and the town stood together in a daylight that made every face plain. Back at the church, the bell rope stirred, and no hand pulled it. Somewhere close, a pocket watch ticked too loud. The canyon waited, as if knowing that even good orders need living hearts to keep them. By late afternoon, the canyon looked different without changing at all. Men hauled timbers and cribbing to the shelf, boots thudding in a rhythm that felt like agreement. The staged crates moved farther from the cairns. Fuses were coiled and tied like sleeping rope. Judge Hollis stayed on the rim, hat tipped down, as if his presence were another kind of stake holding the line. Evan and Ruth paced the chalked curve a final time, measuring with cord and eye. Each step settled something inside him that the badge had unsettled for 2 days. Avery Locke watched with a foreman's focus and a banker's patience. He spoke in low instructions, never shouting, never slipping. Whatever he thought about losing the straight line, he kept it behind the neat click of his pocket watch. Once he turned and found Ruth looking at him. She did not flinch. He tipped his hat, a gesture more habit than warmth, and went back to work. Toward evening, Dodd lumbered up holding a plank with a rough sketch of braces. She'll hold, he told Evan, voice tired but sure. We'll give the shelf a spine. No iron over the cairns, like the paper says. He glanced at the graves and made the sign of the cross, quick as a cough. Good, Evan said. No. Whistles tonight. Let the stone rest. Dodd snorted. Never knew rock to rest. Knows more than we do. He trudged off, hollering for wedges. Judge Hollis found the boarding plank that had served as a table and scribbled a temporary order in a hand as plain as fence post grain. Trust recognized, seat protected, curve adopted, fines for staging within restricted distance. He signed, sanded, and handed it to Locke. File your appeal if you must, he said, but build what the paper and the rock have already decided. Locke scanned the lines, jaw set. I'll pay the fines. He tucked to the order with a care that matched his clothes. Crews want wages, Judge. They'll get 'em. See that they do, Hollis said, softer. Pay buys time. Charity buys peace. Law keeps both honest. Twilight thinned into a blue that made every shape look like a memory. The townsfolk drifted back to porches. Ruth took the sealed envelope and the folding grant back to the church desk and wrote in a neat teacher's script on the outer flap, "Return to its duty." She slid the rubbing beside it, then closed the drawer with the satisfaction of a ledger balanced. Evan stood alone at the jail window, watching lamplight gather in ordinary squares across town. He unpinned the tin star and held it in his palm. The metal bore smudges from his thumb, a faint nick at the rim. He laid it on the peg where it had waited and listened to the quiet, like a man checks his pulse. The star felt lighter when he let it go, but the weight it had taught him stayed. A knock sounded. Ruth, hair loose, ledger under her arm. "You leaving it off tonight?" she asked. "For now," he said. "Marshall'll want it back when he's on his feet." "I never wanted to keep it. I wanted to keep faith." "That's the harder job," she said, and smiled, the kind that warms without asking you to grin. They walked to the canyon edge with no crowd at their backs. Cool daylight had dropped out. The rule slept. Still, they both looked toward the cairns the way one looks, toward a neighbor's window, out of courtesy. The seep whispered over a stone. Somewhere down valley a distant joint pinged, then rested. "Will it keep talking?" Ruth asked, gentle. "Maybe only when it needs to," Evan said. "Maybe we learned enough to not ask." Ruth touched the ledger. "Names are heavier than echoes, but echoes helped us carry them." Bootsteps scuffed behind them. Locke approached, hat in hand, watch closed. For once he looked like a man not speaking to a room, just two people by a rim of rock. "I'll build your curve," he said, and then corrected himself. "Our curve. We'll brace it right. Men keep their days, town keeps its Sundays." He hesitated, as if reaching for a word he didn't use often. "The dead keep their place." Evan nodded. "That's all we asked." Locke looked toward the cairns, not long, but long enough. "Superstition or not," he said, "it made me hear myself. That's costly." He put his hat back on. "Cost paid." He turned, called to Dodd about timber lengths, and the evening refilled with work talk. They stayed until the first star showed, and then another, nailheads on a dark board. The canyon didn't answer, because it didn't need to. Truth stood on its own feet, mercy too. On Sunday mornings after that, folks still walked the wagon road for service, and sometimes the bench near the seep served as a pew. Trains came by slow on the curve, braked respectful, then eased on. You could see men in the cars take off their hats without knowing why. The town kept wages and water. The church kept its ledger of names. The graves kept their view. And every so often, if someone stood by the cairns with a lie coiled behind their teeth, the stone would hand it back to them, not to shame, but to steady. "Speak plain," it seemed to say. "Be answered plain." Evan lifted the star again when he needed to, when tempers rose, when a wagon blocked the street, when a boy ran too hard and bloodied his knee. He wore it as a beam, not a badge. Ruth filed papers the way some people light candles. Locke's watch kept time for a curve that never forgot why it bent. Wind combed Widow's Canyon, land remembered, and the echo when it came sounded less like thunder and more like promises kept.